Hi everybody. I must say this is a very big and a lonely stage if you're on your own. I think they should have given me one of the smaller rooms. I would have preferred to have a panel up here, especially when it gets to question time. Nevertheless, I'm very conscious of the fact that that the weekend is approaching and that there's still so many of you wanting to hear. And I do think, there's definitely a few things that I want to share and get off my heart. And I'm speaking to you today more as a strategist than as a payments expert. If I reflect on the conference so far, we've spoken a lot about the what of payments, all the strategic choices, where it's going, what it can be, the future of payments. But we haven't spent a lot of time on the how of where we are now and what to take forward. And if I then reflect on some of the corridor talk that I'm hearing, and perhaps even some messages that I've heard being delivered up here, Steve this morning, Steve Linnell from Pay Inc. talked about an expanded mindset. We need an expanded mindset. I hope I can contribute a little bit to that expanded mindset through what I'm going to share. I also experienced from Pradeep perhaps a certain level of discontent about the speed at which we are progressing, the inaction that we saw for many, many years perhaps as an industry, but also I think with regards to the PEM program, we 2 years down the road, and the question is, have we made enough progress? So I do think there's perhaps some anxiety in the room, anxiety with all of us. There's heightened expectations, heightened anxieties, and what I want to do today is to see if I can contribute to us lowering that level of anxiety a little bit. Just by saying, we as an industry, we've got it. We know what is expected now, and we can get and move into actually making this happen. But I also think what I would like to share is, or remind us of, I want to remind us what worked and what didn't work in the past. So let's try and connect with a few things that worked for us in the past and a few things that didn't work for us in the past. And see if that reminds us again in terms of the role we need to play now as an industry going forward, and how we actually shape this change and shape the industry as a whole going forward. So I think if I put up this slide, I want to say the anxiety that I hear of in the corridors and so on is to be expected. Because we're not talking about a small change here. It's a large change. It is on every single node of the payments environment, from the operator to PASA to the various PSPs and banks, and it affects most aspects of the national payment system. So it's not strange that we are anxious about this. But let's then make this a whole session, in terms of how to not be anxious about this, how to think about this change, and how to think about what we can again do and have been successful in the past to carry forward. So where I will or where I can, what I'm going to share, I will spice it up with a few stories. Some of you may recognize yourselves in those stories. Just the many interactions I've had with the industry, the various things that I saw that worked well and the things that I actually saw that didn't work well. So I'm going to talk about a few of those impressions I carry forward. One of the impressions that I carry with me very starkly today actually came from the study tour. And that was when we actually sat, and for those that don't know, we took a group of banks and non-banks or payment service providers to India, Thailand, China to look at these faster payment systems. And the impression I carry with me today is us sitting in a boardroom in ICICI Bank of India. And we spoke about the implementation of the UPI. And the question, if I can remember correctly, was, so but how did you guys really manage this so quickly? How did you kind of mobilize yourself? And the answer was, we all just attuned ourselves to the fact that we're now beyond planning mode. We're all in mission mode now. And I think that's where we are as an industry. We've talked a lot about the faster payment system, what we want to achieve, the PEM, the red dot objectives, digitization of South Africa and of payments, the contribution it needs to make to the economy, and so on. But we're in mission mode now. So how do we get into an action state? And what will help us? What will be helpful in a let's call it in a mission mode then, in an action mode? So my message to you today is basically, let's understand a little bit something about this complexity of this change, this enormity of this change, some of the risks and how we actually manage those risks. Because it's so far-reaching and broad, it's changing the national payment system, I would like to talk a little bit about how you can manage some of those complexity. What is it that we as an industry need to do? How do we need to collaborate with the SARP to manage it? And lastly, I'm going to dive into a few tricks and tools and techniques, frameworks that could be helpful. But I think to go too fast to the third point is going to leave you perhaps with a lack of understanding of where it come from. Because I do think we first have to connect with where did those tools and techniques come from? Why did it work in certain instances and other instances not? And that's what I would like to spend the first part of the presentation on. So I would like to perhaps then start with, let's understand the complexity of what we're working with a bit better. The subtitle is, I think, more important here. How do we escape the lobster pots of conventional change thinking? Do you guys know what a lobster pot is? It's this kind of thing. It's a crayfish trap. The crayfish gets into the thing, and it kind of, its mental model saw food, and it saw an entrance into it, and it achieved that part of the process. But it struggled to actually get out, because the level of thinking that was required to get out of the trap is not what was available at that point in time. And I do think we are also finding ourselves in potentially a few lobster pots, crayfish traps. And I would say that's thinking traps that we need to be conscious of. And for me, that's the first thing we need to connect to, is what kind of thinking traps are we perhaps caught up in that we need to kind of get out of if we want to be in mission mode for what we now need to achieve. And let's talk about a few of them. I think with thinking then at the root of most of the problems, I just want to make two additional statements here. And the one is that we are trapped in a situation often about the way we think about it. So adopting a new approach, a new way of thinking of it, will take us to a different place to deal with the problem. But at the same time, I'm acknowledging it that to conceive a whole new way of thinking is extremely difficult. It's not easy. It's something that we need to really work on to actually get there. Now, The first thinking trap that I want to connect with, and this I'm doing very humbly as a strategist, to say, I think the way we think about strategy and strategy as a process to work with the future and with change in itself is a thinking trap. We are a little bit flawed in how we think about these things. And why do I say that? We often think about strategy. Perhaps let me take 1 or 2 steps back. I also observed and saw certain things happening, and sometimes you just feel something kind of just go through the system, you just really make good progress. And then at times it feels as if there's sand in the wheels, we just don't get forward, it's as if the system is pushing back on us all the time. And when I kind of then thought about this, read about it and so on, I actually received certain confirmation for what I thought is happening. And here it is. This is what I'm going to share. So, if you think about strategy, you often think about strategy as a process, as it is all about a strategic choice or about strategic choices. So, what we need to do then is to say, it's about A or B or C. Let's kind of analyze the situation. Let's research the situation. Let's kind of find the evidence to kind of make the right choice here. And I'm not saying that's unimportant, but it's not enough. There's a further problem with that, and that is that when you think about strategy as a construction, as a choice that you actually adopt, you often adopt a realist perspective. Now, with that I mean, and that I've then read is also the case, is once you've conceived the plan, you think it's done. It's on paper. Therefore, it will happen. That's not the reality of how strategy actually works, and that I only picked up much later in my life, and also again reflected on in the past few years in PASA. And that is that, in actual fact, strategy is a social process. It's not a evidence-based analytical process, it's a social process. That's the essence of strategy. So, we have to place much more attention to not the quality of the choice we are making, but the quality of the social process to get to the choices and to the execution of those choices. And what we then experience is strategy becomes sometimes more of an irrational process, more protracted than we may think, but at the same time utterly human and very iterative in its nature. And I want to give you this perspective, is to say that if we start to kind of escape that mindset of strategy is a great job at analyzing the situation, and adopt an approach where we say, well, strategy is actually about a social process. And now it's not about the quality of the outcome and of the document and of the choice and the work we've done to actually get to the choice. Now it's about the quality of the relationships that is going to take us to the choices we need to make, and the quality of the relationships that is going to make us execute those choices that we actually have made. So strategy becomes what they call the living present. It's something that's happening right now. We are now busy with strategy. It's a social process. It is something that is iterative, where the past informs the future, but the future perspective that you adopt again makes you question the past in a different way than what you have done. And as you are doing that, you're also developing new perspectives on the future. So strategy becomes a very different process. And I think that's the mindset with which we actually need to approach mission mode in in the PEM and in what we now need to do. Another phenomena of strategy then is that strategy also becomes emergent. You know, it changes all the time. So your strategic position becomes a bookmark, a reference point, and that helps you to define where we're going next. But you have to keep that iterative process going, and we have to understand that there's a requirement for a lot of collaboration, a lot of voices from all parts of the industry necessary to take us forward to that next part. It defies the notion that strategy can be only driven from a central entity or a central point, one brain. That is not how ecosystems work. There's much more intelligence needed. But what it does also need in this different approach to strategy is you require a lot of quality in the self-reference that the system is going to constantly do. Because remember, we are saying an ecosystem is an adaptive system. You know, it adapts all the time. So let's ask ourselves, what is the quality of our self-reference points? So something like, have we really thought about what the red dot means? Because that's a self-reference point. Are we able to kind of center around this and ask ourselves, what is that going to now require of us? What is it? What is the next step we need to take from there? So having great self-reference points is important in this different way of thinking about strategy. It's almost like an identity thing, you know, is the identity of mission mode is what? You know, is what are we thinking about it? What are we saying about it? It is also about having a very clear vision then, you know, to say we know where we want to end. That will allow the system to kind of adapt around that self-reference point. But then I think a last point is the need for strong principles to drive us forward. And again, I can tell you a little bit of a story here, is the need for principles. I saw that working in instances like where we actually, for instance, sat with a lot of friction in moving certain debit order rules forward and to actually make decisions around it, until we actually defined the principles very clearly and said, well, let's kind of just agree on these principles, you know, and principles like, for instance, when at doubt, the consumer is always more important than the user. We had to say it. Otherwise, we were always going to debate it. And we were debating that principle and then accepted that principle. And it took us to a different place. So, the need for principles. Another example of that was in the PIB. We started off in the first chapter by formulating a number of principles. And I can't tell you how many times we actually had to pause when we actually experienced a lot of friction or opposition on certain design choices and so on, and ask the people, let's go back to the principles. Let's kind of refer to what that is telling us and where that is leading us. And then it broke the resistance down and we could move forward. So quality of interactions, quality of self-reference points for a system to adapt, to move forward, and for something to really, for strategy really to become real and to make progress, to actually get into mission mode. So I think that's then my first point that I would underline is mission mode requires quality of interactions, we'll have to kind of seek those out in what is waiting for us now in this next period. And it needs quality of self-reference points. We need to kind of find those principles. We need to kind of talk about what the vision means. We need to define the vision strong enough for us so that it means something for us, so that we can reference ourselves constantly around that and do what is required and what is necessary. Okay, so that's the first thinking trap. I want us to perhaps also consider a second thing that I see. And unfortunately, that is something about classical problem solving, and that is, we often think that, and this is just some of the, let's call it characteristics of classical problem solving, is we often think that for every problem we actually see and have, we should find a solution, we should find an answer. So improving a system, improving the NPS, is finding an answer or a solution to the problems. Fixing the problems is fixing the NPS. To improve the situation is to get rid of all the problems. And the notion that a normal situation or an ideal situation is a situation without problems. Now, that is not the case. And I do think we need a different vantage point again from where we tackle strategy and from where we tackle the change that we actually now need to do. So I would say that is unhelpful. A different way is to think about the NPS as a CAS. Okay, what is that? CAS stands for a complex adaptive system. So let's just connect with this a little bit deeper, because I do think there's some lessons and learning for us as an industry in how we're taking this forward. Let's just first connect with the root. What is complex? Complex is many parts, it's composite, it's complicated, it's formed by a combination of things, it's an entangled state of affairs. All of this is in the dictionary. It's mixed up with many other things. Now, isn't that the national payment system? So what is a complex adaptive system then about? It's a system, it's an ecosystem made up of many interacting parts. They are constantly interacting with each other. But they have a further characteristic, and that is that they adapt or learn through those interactions. They're never in a static place. This thing is forever and ever moving. And that collective behavior of interacting with each other, learning from each other, and so on, produce something that we call emergent phenomena. In other words, the strategy, the future, the change we want to effect is constantly emerging. And so it should, because we are living in the NPS in a complex environment, and it is a complex adaptive system. And there's a few features that I think we need to touch on and just connect with in understanding this change and why it's important for the industry and going forward. Some of those features of a complex adaptive systems I've listed there for you, like non-linear interactions, feedback loops. There's always the phenomena of adaptation. There's the phenomena of emergence, that things constantly emerge. And often also the need for some form of decentralized control as well, that one place can't have all the answers. You know, we'll have to help that place with answers that we actually also derive elsewhere in the system. Why is the national payment system a complex adaptive system? Because, first of all, we do see many interacting agents, the banks, the merchants, the corporate users, consumers, regulators, government, the technology itself, and so on. So there's all these agents that interact with each other. There's an element of dynamic interaction. So it's an intricate web of how these agents kind of interact with each other all the time. there's constant adaptation. So there's always new commercial realities, new technological considerations, regulatory changes, new market conditions, and so on. And just to underpin all of this, very complex arrangements, legal arrangements, rule books, regulations, policies, and so on, that actually keeps this thing together. So the national payment system, I think we can confidently say, is a complex adaptive system. But then, do we then, if that's then kind of a given, do we then, when we do change, do we connect with some of the aspects of what's typical of a complex adaptive system? The first one I want to talk about is linearity. Now, linearity is a bias. It is a wrong bias. It assumes that a large system, like an industry change, is a linear process. So if we double the input, we will double the output. If we emulate what's happening in another place in the world, we will get the same result here. That's all the associations one can link to linearity. Compared with that, and very different to that, is the fact that a complex adaptive system is non-linear. So you're constantly surprised by inputs in one place having completely different, disproportionate outputs in another place, or the system acting very different to how you thought it would act. And then we are getting very, very aggravated by that. What I'm telling you today is that is just part of the thing that we're dealing with here. We need to make peace with that, and we need to know how to manage that. So some of the implications, however, of changes, if you overwhelm the system with large amounts of change, you don't know what jumps out here to what can I relay it back. You don't know what factors actually created this, what variables drove that kind of outcome. So we have to be more circumspect in how we actually address the change. And I think Pradeep and Herman, for instance, in the meeting before this mentioned it. You'll have to think about small things that you scale quickly, little experiments that you see how fast it actually gives you an answer. And if it takes you in the wrong direction, can it, fail fast and move on to the next experiment. But implementation and life becomes a series of experiments that you actually need to kind of do, that all self-referenced around those principles and those visions that we actually have, but we need to kind of constantly try and connect the dots and make sense of what is happening here. Why is it failing? Why is it not taking us in the direction? And be very agile on our feet in terms of changing it. I think the second characteristic then is predictability. And here's the thing, is we often, as planners, and I'm one myself, we think about the world we live in as a machine, so it can be broken down in little bits and pieces, and if we then kind of improve the pieces, the machine itself will be improved. And again, that's not how life works in a complex adaptive system. So what you have in a complex adaptive system is an element of randomness. It's not completely random, but it's the fact that there are multiple causes or co-producers for a particular thing. And you also see in some of the techniques and so on that I may refer to, that there's ways to actually work back in those causal loops and those causal chains to actually identify what is really the problem. Because mostly, and many times, it is not what presents itself as the problem, but another thing that's actually really the problem. So Arif earlier in the conference spoke about faster payment system and our house of initiatives. And some of those things are foundational, and if it's foundational, it means you can't build the roof now if you haven't got this right first. So it really forces us to work with what is the foundational root cause things first and start there. So that is, I think, how we should connect with this element of predictability. And then there's also the tendency to reduce the system, to analyze only its parts, and you forget about all the other factors that can play a role and that can impact. So again, we have to be conscious of the emergent properties. We have to understand it's a complex system. We have to do more systems thinking when we do strategy work. And therefore our interventions must be designed to understand how the system will react if we do certain things, and also understand where's the high leverage point, what's the lever that we should pull, and perhaps forget about the rest, go and pull that lever and see what that kind of introduces, because often the other problems start to dissolve themselves along the way. So taking that a little bit forward and say, okay, how should we then as a collective manage the change that is waiting for us? This kind of mission mode that we are into now. I think there's a few risk considerations that we should connect with, and that is, first of all, the sheer scale of the change, the parallel changes that will all happen at the same time, the ability for us to pause and actually adjust, because we're going to feel it's going to hammer us from all sides. So as an ecosystem, as an industry, we will be under severe strain in terms of our own adaptive capability. But there's ways to manage that. I'll get to that in a moment's time. Our ability to predict failure points is going to be stressed, and it's going to be very important also to constantly analyze, to constantly connect the dots, see where we are, what is happening, what's working, what's not working. It becomes part of the process in which we actually now need to take this forward. So what mechanisms are we putting in place to be early warning systems, to tell us something is not working, and not to kind of storm blindly down a particular road for a number of kilometers before we actually pause and say, okay, are we running in the right direction? Is it giving us the right kind of answers and such? Resource limitations is another one, because a lack of resources will again strain the adaptive capability of the system. Also, the overestimation of our adaptive capability. We're an industry, but we also have a fairly limited small group of people here, and there's not that many of us that can work on all the projects all the time. So I think that's another risk. Over control is another risk, and then the synchronization of all these regulatory and technological changes, because they can't be out of step with each other. So what would be risk mitigators for those risks? Smaller deliverables, smaller experiments, robust prioritization. So let's focus on what our systemic understanding of the system tells us is the root cause, the first thing we need to fix, and fix that. That must be the minimal viable product. Let's kind of get those small things going. Let's get small successes. Structured collaboration with industry participants. We have to be able to harness the collective wisdom. Nobody has all the answers. As a collective, we have the answers. But we need to really connect with that. Phased implementation, that sometimes, you're not going to implement the whole thing. But let's start with a small stage, or a small phase of it. Let's start small. Let's try one experiment. A systemic planning approach, that we constantly kind of work things back to root causes and such. Improved monitoring, sense making, robust communication. We have to infuse the system with information and communication, because it adapts through all the information and communication that it now receives. That's the nature of a complex adaptive system. And then obviously stable and effective coordination. And that's going to be tough because the coordination mechanisms that we traditionally had in PASA with a strong PMO environment, in Pay Inc. and so on, them is itself under strain now. They are also in a process of change. So you guys need to fill in. You need to kind of help us in this process. But we all understand we need stable coordination mechanisms. Right, that kind of takes me to this point. In the last few minutes, I just want to talk about, very briefly, about a few useful frameworks. The one is this kind of anthology from Dave Snowden. In this picture, you will see that it recognizes that there are certain things where you have visible order, so things are known and obvious. And we must be able to kind of see what is visible and obvious and familiar and can be solved quickly. Because you don't need to overanalyze anything there. Then you have the space of hidden order, so things can be discoverable, so we need to do the research, we need to do the analytical work and so on, but the answers are somewhere, go and find them, get them out quickly, and kind of see which of these solutions, several solutions, recommendations we should actually progress first. But then also to understand when it starts to move to the left and top quadrant, which is the space of complex unorder, the space of a complex adaptive system, where things are not that clear, not that obvious. It becomes clear in retrospect. Now, some of the solutions that we then sometimes find is, for problems, is we see the problem sitting there in the space of complex disorder, but the solutions we want to impose is in the space of hidden order. We analyze things and we discover those things. We need to understand which is which. So that's the first step I think we need to take as an industry, is to kind of say we need to understand when we can move fast and when it's quick and obvious, and let's just make the solution. We also need to understand when is things tough, when is it not that clear and not that obvious, and there's a different process for moving in that space. Some of the other techniques, we worked a lot with systems thinking. So understanding that there's a system that needs to be improved instead of just a number of problem areas, and each of them needs a solution. And I think you may all be aware of this approach to systems thinking, that you need to kind of force yourself to work beyond just the events. That's kind of the obvious stuff that is sticking out above the waterline. You need to be more attentive to the patterns that is emerging. How did this thing happen over time? Why is it doing this? Why is it doing this and then doing that and then again imploding? What we actually really need to understand is the structures, the deeper underlying structures. What is it? How things are wired in the system? And every time we did this, we actually approached more of a systems approach to problem solving, we really got to more sustainable answers for what we need to do. And therefore, I think that's one of the techniques we as an industry should deploy much more going forward. The last one is idealized design, and that is the fact that when we think about problems and improving problems, we often just kind of land up in a space of taking a current reality and making it a current future, but we haven't really improved the situation. We did some great work in the high value space with Vicky, in the low value space with a task team in that space as well, where you actually needed to think about the nature of the problem again, so really you have to suspend yourself a little bit in the mess, in the problems for long enough to understand the causality between all of these problems, but to then from that move to say, ask yourself, what is then ideal? What is firstly the system in focus that kind of jumps at you now as not optimal? But also, what is it saying about the improved state? So what is the measures of performance of an ideal state? What is then the ideal state? And once you have the ideal state, to then say, okay, let's cast back from there and say, what is critical success factors, things we need to get right to get us or to take us to the ideal state. And often your list of issues and interventions look very different if you approach it in this way than when I take that bottom trajectory of just taking every problem and fixing every problem. Just on idealized design, just to make the point about the second part of the step is really to understand the lead lag logic between things, to really suspend yourself in a systems thinking way of work, and to say, okay, let's understand these problems just much better than we currently do. And then I think one last point to make, and that'll be my swan song, is to say that we have to engage the whole system. And there's a few dilemmas that we need to manage here. The one is the dilemma of voice. So the dilemma of voice is asking ourselves or challenging us with, how do we actually give voice to the industry, to the whole system? The system needs to talk. The system needs to collaborate, needs to work towards emergence of something. So I think the one thing is we have to be extremely conscious who we actually have in the room, and that we ensure that the whole system is represented in the room. But also that when you have that you make sure that everybody is given voice. And sometimes you'll have to kind of allow for parts of the system to break away. We again experienced that where we actually in certain instances had to say, go and caucus first, come up with a solution first. Because we knew if we allowed everybody to chip in at a particular point in time, we wouldn't have made the progress. Let certain stakeholder groups come up with their views and perspectives first, then kind of let's connect those things. We did that in the debit space again, where we allowed the banks to we just gave them the chance to articulate their position, and then consulted the views with the rest of the industry. But in an authentic way, in other words, to be open to input, to be open to adjustment, so that something new emerges. You don't want to just enforce a situation. Remember, in essence, this is about emergence, it's about quality of interactions. The second one is the dilemma of structure, and that is that when you actually get something as big as an industry, sometimes in a room as big as this room together, you'll have to structure the discussions. You have to be very smart and clever about how you actually structure discussions and so on. The third one, the egocentric dilemma, and that is the one where sometimes certain voices are just kind of constantly pushing to be heard all the time, and that dominates the discussion. You have to structure in such a way that everybody's voice is heard. So when we start to now work going forward, not just with banks, but with industry at large, we have to make sure that that is the case. And lastly, the contagion of effect. And that is the fact that mood can sometimes swing you in a different direction. So to be conscious and attentive to what's the mood in the room, what is happening here, what needs to be adjusted. And that again connects with the fact that this is strategy is a social construct. The strategic process, the change process, is about the quality of the interaction. Where is it taking us? Is there anything that needs to be adjusted? Because if it's negative mood, you'll have to stop it and arrest it and bring it back. If it's positive mood and you want that to run, that can work to your advantage. That's also the case.